We are also joined by Frank Wolf. He is the CMO and co-founder of Staffbase. He has experience internally working on intranets and helping do the same, help employers connect with their workforce. And we have been talking to Frank and Allison about the challenges that communication professionals experience as they try to bridge this gap with global and multi-generational workers. And I think that both of them just have great expertise and experiences to share with us. And we wanted to share those with all of you that follow us and are on this journey to increase those connections with workers. Throw it over to you and Frank, Allison, and I will hide my here. As we get going, feel free to chat and ask questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Carla. And thank you all for joining Frank and me today. We actually, if you've been on for a few minutes, we started with a little conversation about the World Cup, which is totally appropriate for our session today, because most of the organizations that we work with today really have some challenges because their workforce is so diverse. And we will get into a little bit of what exactly is going on, what some of the statistics are, but let's just talk first about how we're going to do today's session. We're going to talk about our objectives. As I said, we'll cover the workforce challenges that we're facing today. We will give you some ideas for engaging the workforce. And then, as Carla said, we would be happy to take your questions at any point. You can just type them into chat, but we'll also have a question session at the end of our session. So we have an opportunity for you to participate right up front. We're going to have a poll in a moment, so that's where you will be able to tell us what's going on with you. Throughout, Frank and I will share our perspectives and advice and our experience. And please feel free to be as specific as you want to be on questions. This is a great opportunity for you to pick our brains, especially as it pertains to some challenges that you're facing in terms of engaging a very diverse workforce. So when Frank and I were working together to put this session together, we really wanted to focus on two objectives: to create understanding of how the workforce is changing. I'm sure you know this, but we thought it would be helpful for you to get some perspective on this. And then we want to be as specific as possible, as I mentioned, so that you have some techniques. I mean, I always think when I go to a webinar, I really want to have a couple of things that I can put into action immediately. And so that's definitely what we're trying to do here, is give you some very specific ideas that you can put into use tomorrow, next week, whenever. Okay. So now we're going to move over into our first opportunity for you to interact with us. We have a poll which asked you about what is going on with your organization in terms of which dynamic is most challenging. So hopefully you can see the poll. It's a multiple choice. I know what you're going to think. You're going to think, well, I have more. I want to answer all of the above. We didn't give you that option. We really want you to choose the one that kind of comes to mind the most for challenges when you think about your workforce. So we'll give you a second to fill out our first survey, and then we have a second one coming up. So I don't see the results yet, Frank. Are you seeing results yet on our survey?
Not yet. I think, Carla, are you seeing the results?
Yes. Would you like me to do a reveal?
Yes.
Oh, we need a reveal. That's what we need.
Okay. Let's see if we can end the voting now and you can see those results. And I will show the details for you.
The anticipation is growing here.
Okay.
There
There
I
you
didn't want
are.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you
So we have the greatest interesting. That's not what I would have thought. What do you think, Frank? Multiple generations. Or is
I,
the number
I,
one?
I didn't think that this is number one, so it's fantastic. So
Cool.
perfect. Guys, that
Locations is
fits really
something that
well.
I hear a lot from our clients. I mean, more and more, and that location can be, actual physical organizational locations, or it can be simply that people are working remotely as they do more. We have remote workers on the list, and obviously we have diversity. Cool.
Yeah.
So let's look at our second challenge. If we can move to the second quick poll, encourage everyone to take it. So what is the issue that you most need to address, or that you would really like us to address today? Employees don't pay enough attention, they don't understand what they're communicating, or they report that communication doesn't meet their needs. Again, we're forcing you to pick one, which I know is always a little difficult, but what's the one that really comes to mind as your biggest challenge? And again, we'll give you a few minutes to vote. It's pretty simple. And then Carla will do her big reveal.
right.
Yeah.
Drum
Not a few
roll
minutes,
in the
just
background.
drum roll, yeah. So Alison, do you have a guess?
Oh, now this is like a game. Don't understand. I picked don't understand as the top. Which one do you pick?
Well, we see often number 3. So it's it's very often a gap between I don't get enough and I get too much.
Yeah.
That drives communicators crazy. So they
Yeah.
between the overwhelmed employee and the underserved employee, and they say, what should I do? Right, I'm right in the middle.
Yes, and often the overwhelmed employee and the underserved employee is actually the same employee, because they're getting too much of what they don't want and not enough of what they need.
Yeah, so that's a real challenge.
Carla,
Let's see. All right.
Let's see, Carla.
Here we go.
We're both wrong. That's cool. Stump the experts. I like it. So and I do hear don't pay enough attention a lot too. Especially I especially hear it from human resources people, and they get very frustrated because they say, we know employees want information about their pay, their benefits, their performance management, and yet when we provide that information, they don't pay enough attention. And so that frustration I certainly hear a lot as well. As I said, for many of us, we have all three. Many of the companies that we deal with say they have all three. Cool. Okay. So now we're going to move on to, we're going to build upon that, and we're going to share a little bit of information about what's going on. And as I said, you all know this, so it won't be a surprise. But we're going to talk about two challenges. I'm going to talk a little bit about diversity, and then Frank is going to talk about the war for talent. So again, these probably will be familiar to you that by 2025, millennials will actually equal 75% of the workforce. They're currently already the largest generation in the workforce. But the interesting other part of this is that people are hanging around in the workforce longer. There's some economic reasons for that. There are some good health is a reason that people stay long in the workforce longer. A sense of purpose is a reason that people stay in the workforce longer, and also flexibility. So you see here that the number of older people in the labor force, and we've just given you some statistics from US, but it's true in many other parts of the world as well. So what you have is you have more generations in the workforce, which means there's bigger differences between the very youngest junior members and people who have been alive a long time. One of our questions was about remote, and certainly we see that increasingly. Actually, year after year, you keep seeing the percentage of people working increase, the people who are working remotely. We have also, in terms of diversity, we have ethnic diversity. So we have Hispanics making up 20% of the workforce by 2024, and people of color, including Hispanics, will become a majority of the American working class by 2032. So the second part, Frank, I'm turning it over to you.
The war for talent is over and talent won. Yeah, I think that's a for many pretty obvious point. It's just important to mention it here because it also affects the way we look at talent and the way we companies look at their people. Just to give two numbers that are really standing out. If you look at the last couple of years, US unemployment rate is on an 18-year low now. You have many industries like hospitality, like healthcare, like construction, really are looking out for workers to be employed. There's a high quitters rate now, which is at 63%. They say quitter rates goes especially high if people are really confident in the job market to find other jobs. And if you go back to the financial crisis, I think it's 2008 or 9, the quitters rate was about 30%. So it's a huge difference and a huge gap in that respect, right? So companies are really struggling to keep employees around, to have employee retention as one of their core objectives in their employee communication. So looking at the big idea, and the question is, we talked about challenges in how to engage today's workforce. The other side and the big idea behind it is that as a company, you look at a high pace of change in the market, right? And you have to balance on the one hand side your employee needs and your employee perspectives and the market demand for an ongoing change process that's happening in an accelerated speed, right? If you look at things like the Standard & Poor's 500 index, you see that companies in 1935 stayed around 90 years in that index. Today, this went down to 18 years. So the rate of change and the acceleration is going up a lot. And especially just take this week. I don't know if you noticed, there was a pretty big thing happening this week. General Electric is a founding member of the Dow Jones Index. It was in the Dow Jones Index for 110 years. This week, General Electric, as the last founding member, fall out of the index. It was replaced by Walgreens, by the way. So you see there's a lot of pressure on existing large organizations to keep up with the change, right? And that's what we see. And you have, as a leader now, to balance a lot of change, a lot of new things to learn and new things to develop. And on the other hand, your diverse workforce that has won the war for talent, right? So that's the challenge, and the one of the big things in between, the glue, is communication, right? And the goal is to talk about what actually can you do to make communication successful, right? So change. You all know these iconic companies. You all know Amazon, Apple, Google. These companies that are really about learning faster than others, going into market faster than others, and they really have perfected the way we deal with change. And I think that's the big challenge that all larger companies and organizations face today. So communicating with a diverse workforce. What we wanted to share with you are concrete examples how to really do that, Alison.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to go back to one thing you said, Frank, which I'm hearing a lot from our clients, which is communicators. I think communicators feel a lot of pressure today because leaders really understand that communication is the glue. And I think there's great opportunities for, I think it's a great time to be a communicator in an organization because I think there's just tons of potential in terms of how you can make a difference. So that's that I was excited to be here today because I think we can really address some of the issues that we've been talking about in a very meaningful way. And so that's kind of the framing for what we're going to say next. So we've got some, as Frank said, very specific advice and example. Again, I would just encourage you, if you have a question at any point along the way, please type it in chat, and then we'll have some opportunity for questions in a few minutes. So the first thing I would just recommend is make sure that you understand the demographic data in your organization, both so that you can really address the demographic makeup of your organization, but also that it's a great way to counsel leaders and other stakeholders and to use as a basis for making recommendations. Recommendations, for example, that you may need some new technologies, that you may need some resources, that whatever it is that you need. I think a great way to start is by kind of opening people's eyes in the organization about who works at your organization. Because one thing that I find is there's a syndrome that I've named headquarters head. You work in headquarters. Headquarters tends to be pretty nice in terms of the decor. You work with other people who are like you. There's leaders. There's people from HR. There's people from other corporate functions. And you kind of forget what it's like to be a person out there in the rest of your organization.
One example here, because I really love that point to really go into numbers. You often see, as an example, in internal communications intranet projects, the core project teams, typically knowledge workers. So people from IT, communications, HR, they all sit at a desk, they all work in projects. And they can't imagine that there are so many people out there who never work in a project, who never sit at a desk, right? So what we often advise there, really count numbers, right? So how many knowledge workers do you really have? It's surprisingly low in many cases, this number. It's a lot more, what's your field force look like, right? What's your sales team look like? How do they work, right? And if you have the numbers, it's so eye-opening to say, what are really core requirements that we need to do with this?
Yeah. And I mean, the numbers also help you make the case. I mean, the other thing that I always advise our clients is go out there and see what it's like at, some of your major locations, or sit, ride around in the car for a day with a sales representative, or in a truck for a day with the person who's fixing the telephone poles, or whatever that looks like, and you'll see very clearly how little time that person has for communication, how they may have some access issues, and how they may have some big differences in terms of how the ways that they want to receive information. Because they're not sitting and reading is not how they spend their day. So it's good for your own insight to think about demographics, but it's also really good if you want to suggest a change. So that's a good point. So the second part of that is to really make sure that you assess employee needs and preferences. So this is often done you can do it through surveys, you can do it through focus groups, through interviews, through site visits. This is most of what I would be looking for in this particular case is qualitative information about how employees are experiencing communication, how they prefer communication. So again, we'll give you a little bit of an example from a company that's a healthcare product and distribution company. And this is just a little bit of a focus group report. And interesting, there's a change curve in there, because one of the findings from this was that this organization is going through a lot of change, and employees reported that they are experiencing change. They're kind of in the middle of it. So they need a lot of information about what's changing and why it's changing. So again, this kind of research does not have to be complicated, or does not have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be any of that, but I think it's really important to figure out how to do that kind of listening to people so that you really understand what's going on for them. And then one of the things that we just hear a lot from, especially when you do that kind of research, is that there is no such thing as a silver bullet when it comes to what kinds of channels you use. It really requires that you find the right mix. You know, that you may be investing a lot in one tool or another, and those tools are really important. But different people, especially when we're talking about that demographic mix, the global mix, you really do need to have that right mix. So here is an example from a different company, and one of the things that they looked at was how much face-to-face do we need, how much real face-to-face, like people in one room, how much can we do that's still a live experience but it's virtual, how much do we need to do that's using different channels. So how do we create that mix over time, and how do we really manage that in a way so that we're communicating in these different styles and different modes, so we're giving everybody what they need. So I think this, Frank, you wanted to talk about content, the importance of content.
Yeah. And especially, of course, what we see and what's our perspective is a lot of organizations that want to move to more mobile and digital channels in this regard, right? And the question is, how do you do this? Because what we see in many cases, digital is not always good, right? You can also have a digital channel that really doesn't have the reach, that really doesn't have the engagement. So the question is how you do this. And to answer the question, yes, we will, I think, share the deck after the webinar with you guys. So the one of the key learnings that we have in terms of, if you ask us what's a good communications channel digital look like, I think that the one big top that stands above all of this is relevance, right? It's first and foremost, it's relevant for employees. And Alison, as you said, it could be drivers out there in the field that don't have a lot of time during the day. So it really also keeps this all kinds of employee and groups in mind, right? And the major trends that we see here is first, it's a lot faster than everything before. So it's got something like instant notification. So this means if you have emergencies coming up, like bad weather situations and all that stuff, you now have a channel to actually address that. That's nothing that was there like 10 years ago, right? Interaction is a huge topic. So you want to get feedback from employees, and it can start really easily, like what actually do they read in terms of analytics? I want to learn which topics really go well with them. I want to have things like likes, comments, polls. I really want to learn from my front line how they work with the customer. I want to have the feedback faster than ever before, right? Third topic, rich media. I think it's pretty obvious to talk about more pictures, more videos. The main challenge that we see with many organizations, and especially talking about the multi-generational workforce, is that many younger employees are used to social media. They are used to see content in a very quick and easy digestible way. So they won't read long texts, long articles. They really want to see what's going on in a really short time frame. So it's really important to have other types of content there available. Local is especially important if you have a global organization, and we talk here about planned communication, locations across the US for sales, for service and other, or like retail or hospitals. Usually employees care more about what's happening in their local entity than what's happening at the center of the company. So it's a great idea to mix up local content and central content just to increase relevance and really make them feel at home with their location, and on the other hand also get information from the center, right? And at the end, one thing that we learned that's a real great I think also advise if you want to increase the reach, don't just think about communication. It's always great to also put yourself in the position of the employee and think about employee experience. What are other services that employee would love to have on these channels, right? This can be a shift plan, a phone book, this can be their pay stubs or benefits information. Whatever helps them, whatever is practical for them, it's great because it helps the channel to be important for employees, and you will see just higher engagement rates, right? So if our best customers in terms of employee apps, they have active employees there of more than 90%, right? So that's achievable in such a channel, right? I think that's the good news here.
And Frank, sorry, I just want to add something because the companies that we work with that introduce an app, one of the, I think the things that they, the unintended consequence is they understand that their content is not meeting people's needs. It's, you know, so if you have boring corporate types of content on, let's say, your intranet, and then you say, well, we'll introduce an app so that our remote employees, for example, can, people on trucks, people in manufacturing, whatever it is, can access the information. You've only solved half of the problem, which is the channel. You haven't solved the other half of the problem, which is the content. So I think that that's one of the reasons that people struggle when they decide to introduce new tools, is because it's not just about introducing the new tool, it's about rethinking the content. And you know, so it's kind of like that wake-up call, like, oh, wait a minute, now we've put this information in people's hands, but it's not the information they're actually looking for.
It's a great point, Alison, and I think especially like the added value local stuff is one point in that direction. We actually have a name for it. I call it digital disillusionment. This means at the moment when you have stuff in paper, like you have an employee magazine, and you say, I print 10,000 of these and I distribute them, you always think with those 10,000 you reach 10,000, but that's not really the case. The first time you put something, you do it digital, and measurement is a lot easier. You actually get the feedback about your content, and there's a lot of discussions going on and thinking going on, which is great because it improves content and it helps you as an organization to say we need to do things differently, right? We need to get our message out. We have more video, more pictures.
Right.
We need to have more relevance, right? And that's the best thing to start with.
Right, and I think the other part of it that I'm seeing a lot is you can be fooled if what you're producing is mostly what I'll just call articles, so it's written content. You can be fooled by thinking that people are reading that content or really understanding that content because you might have a good click-through rate. You know, like if you have an intranet, so you're like, oh well, people are clicking on that content, but they may not they may just click on it and then leave. You know, you may not have all the facts in terms of that. So, you know, many of our clients are now using the metrics again to make a case to stakeholders, leaders, and stakeholders that the content that the leaders most want to share may not be the content that employees most want to have. So I like your term digital disillusionment because you're really like, well, wait a minute, were people never reading this? And the answer may be yes, they were never reading it, but it was sort of the corporate approach was these are things they should want, but they're
so
now
you say, that's a nice view. Yeah. That's a nice view. So you're saying it helps communicators to actually to bring the bad message to the leader and saying, hey, you have to change. We have to change. It's not me. It's there, right? It's in the numbers.
I'm not saying it, right? So you increase your abilities as a counselor, as a consultant, because you're saying it's not my viewpoint. employees are voting with their feet on this. I mean, they're voting with their actions, and they're not. I mean, it even works for something simple like an intranet. If you have great metrics on your intranet and you say, oh, wait a minute, people are much more likely to go on to content that's more personal, that's more helpful than they are kind of a corporate press release. Even that little bit of metric helps you say, wait a minute, why are we publishing press releases when that's not the information that employees want? So anything and all of it is really good.
Yeah, yeah. So we can say like digital and also analytics is like a catalyst for change in communication.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's true. Okay, so let's keep going. One of the things that that when Frank and I were putting this together, we were talking about kind of this idea of enlisting. And we often talk about the key role of leaders and managers in an organization, but I think it's a really good thing to think of this group of people who may not be a leader, may not be a manager, but they are very influential. And sometimes organizations, for example, if they're undergoing a big change, they think about people who are change agents or change ambassadors who can help spread the word and help have conversations with people. By the way, it's also helpful to think about tools to help these folks be more knowledgeable about a topic, or ways of really thinking about how to equip these important people within your organization with what they need to be successful. So this is it's a little blurry right now, but this is another example from a company that's using change ambassadors. These are average employees who have been identified. There's more than 500 in this organization who have been identified as they're all throughout the organization, all different generations, all different roles, but they are really have been identified as being influential. So this organization is getting them together about once a month, every 2 months, to talk about some issues that the organization is going through. It's not like they have to go around with posters or placards, or we're not asking them to be spies or anything like that. The organization's just saying, we would want you to be in the know because we know how influential you are in the organization. So if you know what's going on, if we equip you with some information, if we answer your questions, then you're going to be able to dispel rumors. You're going to be able to, set the record straight, and you're going to, just going to be able to help our organization get through some change that we're undergoing. So that's a very, and you have probably heard the term influencers in marketing. In marketing, they talk about people who, for example, review products, or people who are in a role in society, in the marketplace, where they're recommenders, for example. Well, you can use that same term inside the organization to really think about how to share information and communicate.
And it's maybe to at this point, I've seen a great session. We've been at the IABC World Summit in Montreal a couple of weeks ago. I've seen a great session there about influencers, and there was a session about a company that's measuring and counting influencers in large organizations, and they had a couple of really nice numbers. One number was that the most influential employees impact other employees 10 times more than the average employee, right? Mm-hmm. And they also said, if you have the right 3% of employees, you can impact 90% of all other employees. So it's a really powerful tool and method to think about, to really use, not in the term of use, but really enable the right people to also help you with your message, right? And this can be down to really practical things like safety is a big topic for our customers, right? How can I improve safety in the company? The one thing is to have the safety officer talk about this all the time, maybe with a video, but you can also have an employee who maybe had an accident and who really, where something happened, to talk about it and to say, why did it happen, and why he thinks it's so extremely important to think more about safety in an organization. And just one example, there are many others to think about here, and especially with multiple generations, right? So if you have specific issues that are for the older workers in the company, it's great to think about who could deliver this best, right? Is this the young new millennial talking about this, or do you really find somebody with an influential role that's a lot more credible to this audience, right?
Yep. Yep. That's a really good point. Okay. So finally, number 6 is measure. And you can see that Frank and I are big into metrics. But I really think it's important as we think about how you address this global, multicultural, multi-generational audience, that you are measuring the results of what you're doing, and again, using it to counsel, to make a case for whatever you need to make a case for, but also that you know that what you're doing, how well what you're doing is working. And I think there are still in organizations a lot of assumptions that we sent it, therefore it worked, or we had the town hall and therefore everybody got it. But that's often not the case. So this is an example of a scorecard, a way of doing, this happens to be an external example, but there's an internal example as well, of actually having a metrics report at every quarter, or every so often. So that you are really bringing those metrics to the fore, and whatever metrics you have or can get, that you're using them to tell your story. And certainly one of the nice things is the metrics from many of the tools and apps are much better than you ever had before. I guess that's the good news and the bad news, right? Because you can't hide. You can't just say, oh, we created this newsletter and now we're hoping for the best. You really know how employees are interacting and experiencing the communication. So metrics are really important. So now it's time. We have definitely a few minutes for any questions.
Allison, I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
I love the discussion as well about identifying change ambassadors and influencers. I saw one of your points is to use a survey to do that. What would be some of your suggestions for other ways to identify those people, and what would be the qualifications for those people that you're looking for?
Yeah, there's been many organizations that identify influencers are looking for people who actively participate in some way. You know, the question is how do you do that, right? Often, for example, if you have a social media component of your communication channels, who's on there, who's writing blogs, who's asking questions, you know, who's participating. And the participation can be positive or negative. It's not like you're looking for people to wear a cheerleading outfit. You really want people who are thoughtful and who are vocal and who are, you know, really, I guess, fully participating. So I think that is a very valuable way to seek out. And you can also ask for volunteers. I worked with one organization where they said we're looking for people to tell a story. They were actually introducing a new brand, and they wanted people to participate in the launch of this new brand. And they said, who would like to raise their hand? And they got a lot of people who really were excited about the fact that the organization had a new brand. Obviously, that's very positive. And those folks came to training. They participated in activities. It was really great because, as Frank said, it wasn't just one person like the CMO kind of standing up there and talking to everyone. It felt much more participative.
Right, got it. So look for the hands raised, and then also look at the metrics on various platforms. Those are good tips. Right?
I see when you have.
Yeah.
Question about this digital disillusionment. Yeah, I think in the short term, what we mean with it is that typically, and I think Alison just said this, whenever you start to have things digital, measurement is a lot easier and better, right? And if you take your kind of old habits to write long articles and all that stuff into the new digital world, many are shocked that their reach is really not that good with this kind of content and with this kind of approach. And that's what we mean with digital disillusionment. So, and this is not about the digital channel or does technology work or whatever. It's really about content and does that content appeal to the audience, right? But it's I don't see this as a negative term at all. It's really something. It's in most organizations, it's the start of a learning process, right? And as Alison pointed out, in many cases, it also helps the communicator to go back to their management and to others to say, hey, we need more of this content. Look at this, how great this really resonates, and we get so much engagement around these topics. And let's not do other topics where the leadership thinks we need to do more of that, right?
And Frank, I would just like to add that I think the disillusionment comes because there's, I'll just back up for a minute. It is amazing to me how many organizations have not routinely been measuring the effectiveness of their communication. So suddenly you have an app, a tool that has measurement built into it, and you can't avoid the measurement. So you've suddenly gone from, you know, I guess being optimistic that the communication is working to having these hard facts in front of you that show whether or not it is working or to what extent different components are working. And you can't escape them, those facts. So that's where the disillusionment is like, oh, wait a minute, was anyone ever looking at this content before? We just didn't know. And now we do know, and now we're confronted with the fact that we have to do something different, which is you know, a little shocking. The other thing I just like, sorry, go ahead, Frank.
No.
Okay. So the other thing I'd like to say is, one of the things that we're spending a lot of time doing is we're saying, how do you turn this story into something that's much more appealing? So an example would be, there's a lot of efforts in an organization to reduce costs or to improve quality or whatever it is. And the typical way of telling that story would be an article quoting the vice president of blah, 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 you know, and having it be very top down and corporate, and it's dense and it's got a lot of facts in it. Well, there are 50 ways to turn that content into something that's intrinsically more interesting to employees. Suddenly it's a short video. It's an infographic. It's profiles of people throughout the organization at different levels who are working on this effort. You know, it's a testimonial from somebody who has benefited from this effort. So it's taking the same story that you want to tell, which is the effort to improve X, but you're telling it in a way that is much more interesting in a better format for the diverse workforce, easier to digest, faster for them to go through, because it's now a 45-second video, not a 1,000-word article, et cetera, et cetera. So it's rethinking content to fit these new formats and also to meet the needs of employees.
Perfect. We have two more questions. The first one is around metrics. Which specific metrics do you use and how do you collect the data? I can talk about it, or
Yep. You want to start?
Yeah, sure. From our perspective, it starts off with the first question is, if you look at all your employees, how many of them, what's the percentage that's actually, for instance, in the app, right? So how many are actually onboarded, right? That's the first one. So the best rates that we see there are around like 95%, but this also, it really varies and it really depends on the content that you have in there. The second would be how many of them are active. Active, probably you would measure this on a weekly basis. So going in again, reading stuff or doing comments and likes. The third one would be how many are engaged. Engaged would be they really leave comments, do surveys, and all that. And then you can also break this down in two ways. One in a per content basis. So you would say for a specific article, how many visits do I have on the article and how many unique users have seen this? If you have really kind of controversial or highly interesting content, you see that also employees coming back and reading this twice or 3 times, show this to colleagues, and so you see a lot of that going on. And something that that's also highly interesting and that we move into right now is that you can break this down by groups. So you can say, I have a company-wide communication, and I can break this down and say, in my US locations, I have a lot more engagement around this than in my German locations, for instance, or I have 3 plants and I have a new safety initiative, and I see that in one plant, the employees there don't really read it and don't really interact with it. So it gives you a guidance and advice to look into this and say, hey, why don't I have to reach in that area? So that's around the metrics that we see as most important.
Those are good, yeah. So let's take the next question, which is translation. Maybe I'll start and you can chime in as well. I mean, I think that every organization, there's no one answer for this, but I think the most important thing is to have a translation philosophy and strategy. Most organizations that we know don't translate absolutely everything, but they do definitely decide which content is most important to translate. And then also they have a formula for deciding how many languages to translate into. A lot of companies use an 80-20 rule or a 90-10 rule. If you are really global and operating in dozens and dozens of countries, it's probably very difficult to do 100% of your, what's really hard to do 100% of your content translated to 100% of the people. But it's really important to look at your demographics and decide which languages are most important for you to translate into and which content is most important for you to translate. So that's some of the perspectives that I've seen. I don't know, Frank, do you have anything to add?
I think maybe one point that's might be technical, but I think really interesting, because what we hear very often, that people look at things like Google Translate and they say, I have this internal content, why can't I use Google Translate to kind of help me, right? And there are now 2 ways to do this. One is you take the content, go to Google Translate, translate it, and then as an organization, you have to make sure that it's correct, that you that it's really saying what you want to say, and you have kind of an editing process going on, right? Mm-hmm. The other way to do is, which is also pretty interesting, is you put this out, like say you have an English text and you put this out to your French employees, and they have a button that says translate. And when they press that button translate, it means it goes automatically to a translation tool like Google Translate, could also be others. And then it's translated. The big difference is that employees know at this moment, I see an automatically translated text in front of me, right? So, and that's the big difference. They know there could be some mistakes from the automatic translation in there. It's not like, feels like official company content. Everyone gets a 10% raise, whatever, so whatever happens in there. So we see both cases. And as a company, Alison, you're right. You need to, I never hear the word translation strategy, but I think that's exactly it, right? You need to just decide which way you want to go, for which type of contents you want to open up, maybe the automatic translation, and maybe for the really important ones, you won't switch it on, because you still want to be in control of what you say.
Then, if you would like to bridge the gap even further, you can sign up for a demo with us at staffbase.com/demo, and we'll talk through some more best practices from other organizations that have done this with branded employee apps. I think that's it for us today. Thank you all for joining. We have enjoyed it very much, and I have learned a lot, as well as increased my vocabulary from Frank and Allison. And we hope that you guys will join us again next time. Thank you, Allison, for all of your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Great working with you.